Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Much has been written and said since Joseph Parker's win over Hughie Fury in Manchester. Most of it has focused on what some have seen as a controversial result, and of course we've all moved on to the New Zealanders' likely next opponent. So I've done a couple of videos on that sort of stuff myself, but I've kept thinking about what we saw in the Fury fight, and in general from Parker's past few fights. And I thought, well, it's probably worth actually just teasing out a few more threads here and adding it to the conversation, because I think there's a couple of points worth considering. So as we know, Parker's team, Duco Events, it has secured opportunities in the past 18 months that have ultimately put Parker on the fast track to the title, with the Takam fights and the Ruiz fights in particular. So I remember Kevin Barry ahead of the Takam fight saying it was a huge step up for Parker, and in all honesty it may be a bit too soon for him given his development. So since then Barry has sort of echoed that similar sort of sentiment at different times, and he keeps talking about Joe being a fighter who is still developing, still under construction. So I just wonder, are we being a little bit harsh on Joseph Parker when we expect dominant performances and he doesn't quite meet those expectations? But ultimately and importantly for him, he's kept winning. He's won the belt and he's kept the belt. And that guarantees that he remains a hot commodity in the division, someone who people want to willingly fight. I'll throw in an analogy here. I mean, perhaps Parker is a bit like a new house. It looks nice and shiny on the outside, but inside there's still some work happening to make sure that the interior is finished. So from a development standpoint, when I start running through where Joseph Parker has come from in a short space of time through the tough opposition that he's fought, I'm more willing to cut him a break and more willing to cut Kevin Barry a break. I mean, when Daniel Dubois, here's just something I was thinking about, when he fought a couple of weeks ago, one of the commentators cautioned against rushing him along despite however good he might look right now. He said it can take 10 years to build up a heavyweight and 10 seconds to tear one down. So with that ringing in my ears, it does make me think, well, Parker, he has been pushed along quite quickly, and he's been in some legitimately, 50-50 fights. Probably before he was really ready in some cases, or at least before his trainer Kevin Barry had planned for. So don't get it twisted, I'm not saying Parker isn't talented, because his talent is undeniable. He couldn't have got this far if he wasn't. But he has taken on some stiff competition in the past year or 18 months. And they have, by and large, been very competitive fights, close fights. And fortunately for him, he's come out on the other side with some great experience, and he's kept that O intact. I mean, I think what I'm saying, you could actually easily apply it to Hughie Fury, who, looking at the result and offensive output from the Parker fight, maybe it was a year or two too soon for the 23-year-old. But back to Parker. We can all see flaws in his game, but then again, all boxers have them. But with more time, training and development, some of those things can be fixed, tweaked, or at least minimized. Conversely, you'd also like to think in another year or two, there would be elements that would be much better than they currently are today. And if we look at what's next, Parker does have a voluntary defense. I mean, one commentator from a recent video that I did, he's pretty adamant Parker might be able to squeeze in 2 voluntary defenses before a mandatory is called. It's a possibility, but whatever the case may be, Parker and his promoter Duco Events are now in the box seat, and they are in control of opponent selection for this voluntary. So Duco's David Higgins said he and Kevin Barry will decide on that opponent that is next. So for me, if the ultimate goal is an Anthony Joshua fight and subsequent payday, then what better opportunity than to now make sure that development is put back to the forefront? They have an opportunity. As I touched on in my last video looking at an opponent, which could be 9th ranked Kyotaro Fujimoto. That's not really a fight I want to see from a fan perspective. But it could ultimately happen if the money is right. But from a developmental standpoint, It's a much softer fight that could allow Parker to show a few things he's been working on, either by way of fixing things or introducing new stuff that he's been working on, that he's been adding to his arsenal. I mean, certainly looking good and culminating with a vicious KO, it also puts him back in the minds of some fans who have been doubting him and his power. But regardless, the doubters will remain even if he did blow through a Fujimoto type of opponent, or even if he struggled past, for example, a Dillian Whyte, which is a fight I would rather see personally. His reputation and stock will only rise off the back of a dominant performance against a top opponent. So if Joseph Parker is coming into his prime, and bear in mind he is only 25, then soaking up some time now to help him reach his potential might actually be invaluable. I remember Barry saying previously he was a year or so ahead of where he'd planned to be. He might be able to make up some of that time now. I could see a Fujimoto type of fight the end of this year or early next, and then if they were to squeeze in a second voluntary, if that was in fact allowed, they'd probably set up another highly winnable opponent. And then you'd have the mandatory challenger being called, which at this stage you'd have to say would be sometime in the middle-ish or just after the middle of next year, and it would look like second-ranked Christian Hammer would be in the box seat to be elevated from second into that mandatory position. I mean, you never really know, but we'll have to see. But that fight, if it was a Christian Hammer for the mandatory, it's a very winnable fight. One that Joseph Parker could probably look pretty good in. From a business perspective, ringing the till with lucrative fights and holding on to the belt makes a lot of sense. And developmentally, it gives Parker time to hone his skills against guys that are good, but not quite top draw. But I guess the rub there is that if Parker starts doing that, it'll be a pretty obvious tactic, and he will be copping some flack about holding the belt hostage and fighting bums, etc. Same sort of stuff that Deontay Wilder gets. I'm more inclined to think, though, that Duco will be chasing the money, given some of the comments that they've made in the past. I mean, they do have an obligation to their fighter. It's his career after all. He won't be fighting forever. Got to make as much money as you can. So I'm not going to begrudge him the opportunity to make money. But in terms of legacy and standing within the division, there is an element where he could actually take a hit on this if he fights the guys that people go, well, that's a pretty soft opponent. But say in a year's time, though, if he's fought a couple of guys and come along, got some wins, looked pretty good in the process of doing so, and is still undefeated, then an AJ fight would seemingly be there for him. He might be more ready by that time to face such a tough assignment. So judging by the sort of reaction out there sort of in the wider boxing community at the moment, and I'm going to sort of put Joseph Parker fans to one side here because a lot of Joseph Parker fans think he could beat Anthony Joshua right now. But wider, not a lot of people are really clamoring for a Joseph Parker and Anthony Joshua fight right now. Sure, if Joshua was able to sort of unify and take a belt off Deontay Wilder, for example, the calls would start to grow because then people would be saying, well, Joshua can go undisputed. But right now, and from a business point of view, someone like Eddie Hearn will be thinking, well, it's just not going to work. I mean, he's just come off a performance where he won against Fury, but he didn't necessarily look stunning doing it. He got the win, and that's all that mattered. But from a business point of view, Hearn will be looking at all these factors going, well, I need him to be facing some guys and looking really good because it will build up some hype for a fight with Joshua. The two will meet at some point, but the timing's got to be right. And it's not about marinating the fight or anything like that, any crap like that. It's more that at the moment it just doesn't make sense. And I actually think Parker needs a little bit more time just to work on some things. I do think he would give a good account of himself right now, but I think another year, well, he's going to be a lot more dangerous then. And that sort of timeline, if we're looking at that, say AJ gets past Pulev and then gets past Wilder or Ortiz, which Eddie Hearn has said that Joshua will face the winner of Wilder Ortiz next sometime early next year. I mean, bear in mind there's a lot of moving parts here and things can change in a heartbeat. But it would be a logical conclusion sometime in late 2018 for a Joseph Parker fight. I think Hearn would be pushing Duco events and anyone else who's involved with Team Parker to try get in the ring with one of his other guys ahead of that though, because they want to either take the belt and make money from Dillian Whyte or Tony Bellew. So World Boxing News, and this is why I bring up those other couple of names as well, it's got its own line on this, and see the link in the description. So it says, WBN has been informed that Parker will make his choice from the WBO ratings for a pre-Christmas contest, possibly on home soil or in Japan, before taking on the winner of Tony Bellew's imminent rematch with David Haye. Bellew vs Haye 2 is penciled in for the O2 Arena in December, live on Sky Sports box office, in what will effectively be an eliminator for Parker's coveted strap. The Parker encounter would then take place in March on UK soil, maybe even at the same London venue in Greenwich. Should Parker come through those two bouts in the next 6 months, a huge 4-bout unification contest with Anthony Joshua lies in wait for the undefeated ruler, currently penciled in for July at England's famous Wembley Stadium. So I'm not sure who WBN was informed by, but I think that scenario, without any facts to back it up, probably holds as much weight as my musings. But certainly it appears Duco, they will do whatever is best for Parker financially, so there are options out there to be pursued, and Haye and Bellew are among them. I mean, presumably a Dillian Whyte fight is right there now if they want to take it, but I imagine it comes down to how much Eddie Hearn is willing to stump up. He's already been talking to anyone that will listen that Parker's stock has dropped, and Duco has been trying to counter that and say that, well, and making it plain, you're not the only game in town and we're looking at our options, Japan and United States and whatever. So there'll be a little bit of horse trading and whatnot before we find out where this thing goes. But I did note in that story, it says Wilder would be impacted by a Joshua Parker clash. From what Hearn is saying, well, that would take place in February, once the winner of Wilder Ortiz is determined in November. The winner from that fight would fight Joshua early next year, possibly in February. So that's what he's been maintaining in recent weeks. So I don't know if they've got another line on this or have some information suggesting otherwise, but that's what they're implying. Okay, so the best part of another year to do a voluntary or two, then a mandatory. It's also going to settle a few burning questions about Parker's trainer, Kevin Barry, who has guided Parker for the past 5 years or so. It will allow us to see if Parker becomes that fully constructed fighter that Barry says he has been methodically building. If the losses had have started coming already, I think this conversation would have been more amplified and maybe we would have seen a change. I don't know. Stuff.co.nz, it has done an opinion piece on this, so link in the description, with one of its commentators saying, let's keep the status quo, and the other saying, well, things have run their course. Both make decent arguments for going one way or the other. So I did actually weigh in on the poll, and you can do the poll too if you want. And I actually think you will see there from on screen that I have gone for keeping the status quo. But as you can see from the screenshot, almost half think Duco and Barry have to go. So for me, that's a little bit premature and a bit over the top. I mean, given Parker has been guided this far, I mean, it's been a lot more than luck that's got him to this point, and he's still got his own. He obviously fights in the ring, but Duco fights outside of it and has landed the opportunities. So also remember that just on Duco, Parker comes off contract at the end of next year as well. So for me, until that happens, I don't think we're going to see a change of either trainer or promoter. And then in the meantime, though, it certainly gives Kevin Barry some time to prove that Parker can mix it with the top couple of heavyweights in the world. Some of you, I know, will say he can do that now, but others do have doubts and think he is overrated and underperforming. Ultimately, for me, time will prove out both those points. Okay, that's it from me. What do you make of it? There's quite a bit to unpack there and weigh in on, so drop your comments loud and often. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.